In the frozen dawn of a Texas prairie, a woman crawls through thorns in a blood-soaked wedding dress, her back carved with the word worthless. But when a Comanche warrior finds her dying body, he doesn't see shame. He sees survival. This is the story of Lila Carter, who was thrown away like trash by the man who vowed to love her, only to discover that sometimes salvation comes from the hands you were taught to fear. Stay with me until the very end, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far Lila's story has traveled across this world. The thorn bush tore another strip of silk from what used to be a wedding dress, and Lila Carter didn't even flinch anymore. Pain had become a language she spoke fluently now, every nerve in her body screaming in a dialect of agony that needed no translation. The white fabric, once pristine as snow on her wedding day 3 months ago, now hung in ribbons of rust brown and deep crimson, dragging through the dust like the train of some hellish gown designed for a bride descending into the underworld. She couldn't remember when she'd stopped walking and started crawling. Somewhere between the moment Jacob and his brothers had thrown her from the wagon and the point where her legs simply refused to obey her anymore, the distinction had blurred into irrelevance. What mattered now was the mesquite tree she could see perhaps 100 yards ahead, its twisted branches promising shade, though whether she sought shelter from the merciless sun or simply a dignified place to die, she couldn't say. The Texas prairie stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of buffalo grass and prickly pear that rolled toward horizons shimmering with heat even though dawn had barely broken. The sky above wore that particular shade of pale gray that comes just before sunrise, when the world holds its breath between darkness and light, and for a moment Lila wondered if she'd ever see the sun again. The thought didn't frighten her the way it should have. Her hands, torn and bleeding from dragging herself across ground studded with thorns and sharp stones, found purchase on a clump of prairie grass. She pulled. Her body moved forward perhaps 6 inches. She reached again. Another 6 inches. The mathematics of survival reduced to fractions so small they seem meaningless. Yet she continued because stopping felt too much like surrender, and somewhere in the shattered remnants of her spirit, a tiny flame still flickered with something that might have been defiance. The smell hit her before the sound did, that distinctive stench of death and decay that makes the stomach clench and the throat close. Somewhere nearby, something had died. The wind shifted and she heard them, the heavy flap of wings, the hissing squabble of vultures quarreling over carrion. Her vision swam, darkening at the edges, and for a terrifying moment she wondered if the thing that had died was her, if she was already a ghost crawling through a landscape of memory. But ghosts didn't hurt like this. Ghosts didn't feel the fire that consumed her back, where Jacob had pressed the branding iron against her skin while his brothers held her down. Ghosts didn't taste blood and dust and the copper tang of despair. "Please," she whispered to the empty prairie, to the God who had abandoned her, to anyone or anything that might be listening. "Please just let it end." The universe, as it often does, answered, but not in the way she expected. The hoofbeats came as a distant thunder, rhythmic and growing louder, and Lila's remaining instincts screamed at her to hide. She rolled toward a cluster of prickly pear, ignoring the spines that bit into her flesh, adding new wounds to the catalog of injuries her body already bore. She pressed herself flat against the earth, her cheek against dirt that smelled of sage and ancient stone, and held her breath as the rider approached. Through the screen of cactus and grass, she could see him, a man on a paint horse, his dark hair long and unbound, wearing buckskin leggings and a shirt decorated with what looked like quill work. Everything she'd been taught since childhood, every sermon and warning and whispered horror story, compressed into a single word that her mind screamed even though her lips remained sealed: Comanche. Jacob's voice echoed in her memory. "They're devils, Lila. Savages who'll do things to a white woman that'd make your hair turn white. You ever see one, you pray for death before they touch you." She found herself doing exactly that, praying for death, but not for the reasons Jacob had intended. Let this warrior kill her quickly. Let it be a blade or a bullet, swift and merciful. Anything was better than crawling through this wilderness waiting for thirst or exposure or wild animals to claim her slowly. The horse stopped so close she could smell it. Horse sweat and leather and something else, something that smelled like cedar smoke and grass. The rider dismounted with practiced ease, his moccasins silent on the ground. She could see his legs now, the fringed buckskin decorated with beadwork, the way he moved with an economy of motion that spoke of perfect confidence in his body. He was tracking something. She could tell by the way he walked in a slow circle, head down, reading the ground the way she might read a book. He crouched, ran his fingers across the dirt, stood again. He was perhaps 15 feet away now, and if he looked in her direction, he would see her as clearly as she saw him. The wind shifted again, and the horse raised its head, ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring. It looked directly at her hiding place and snorted. The warrior turned, following the animal's gaze, and Lila found herself staring into a face that shattered every expectation she'd carried. He wasn't old, perhaps near 30, with features that struck her as impossibly handsome in a way that felt dangerous to notice. High cheekbones, strong jaw, eyes so dark they seemed black in the early light. But it was the expression in those eyes that made her breath catch. Not cruelty or violence or the savage hunger she'd been taught to fear, but curiosity, watchfulness, intelligence. He said something in a language she didn't understand, his voice low and steady, not threatening. When she couldn't respond, he took a step closer. Lila's hand scrabbled against the ground, searching for something, anything to use as a weapon. Her fingers closed around a rock the size of her fist. She dragged it toward her, knowing even as she did so that it was futile, that she was so weak she probably couldn't lift it, much less throw it with any force. "Please," she heard herself say, her voice a ruined croak that barely qualified as human speech. "Please, just make it quick." The warrior froze. His head tilted slightly, and she realized he'd understood her words, or at least understood that she'd spoken. He crouched down, lowering his center of gravity in a way that made him less threatening, though she noted with the clarity that comes from absolute helplessness that he could still reach her before she could move an inch. He spoke again, and this time she caught fragments that sounded almost like English, though heavily accented and shaped by a different tongue. "No harm," he said, or something like it. "No harm to you." She wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Here she lay dying in the thorns, her back carved with her husband's assessment of her worth, and this stranger promised no harm, as if there was anything left to harm. But laughter required breath she didn't have, energy that had fled her body along with too much blood. He moved closer, and now she could see his eyes more clearly. They weren't black after all, but a brown so deep it drank the light, and they were studying her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and, impossibly, seen. Not as an object or a possession or a problem to be solved, but as a person. When was the last time someone had looked at her that way? Had anyone ever? "Water," he said, clearly this time, and made a drinking motion with his hand. "You need water, yes?" She tried to nod, but even that small movement sent spikes of agony through her neck and shoulders. The warrior, Kaya, though she wouldn't learn his name until later, seemed to understand. He rose and walked back to his horse, moving out of her limited field of vision. She heard him rummaging through something, the soft clink of items being moved, and then he returned carrying a water skin decorated with beadwork. He knelt beside her, maintaining that careful distance, and held up the water skin where she could see it. "I come closer now," he said, pronouncing each word with deliberate care. "To give water, not to hurt. You understand?" She managed a tiny sound that might have been agreement. What choice did she have? If he meant to kill her, at least she'd die with water on her lips instead of dust. Kaya moved to her side and gently, so gently it made her want to weep, slipped one arm beneath her shoulders and lifted her just enough that she could drink without choking. The water skin touched her cracked lips, and the first drop of water that hit her tongue felt like resurrection. She drank greedily, desperately, until he pulled the skin away. "Slow," he said. "Too fast, you sick. Small drinks. Yes?" He let her have 3 more small sips before he carefully lowered her back down. As he did, his hand brushed against her back, and she screamed, a raw animal sound that sent birds scattering from nearby bushes. Kaya jerked back, his eyes wide, and she saw something flash across his face that she couldn't name. He said something rapid in his own language, then seemed to force himself to calm. He moved around her carefully, and she realized he was trying to see her back. "No," she gasped, trying to curl in on herself. "Don't look. Please don't look." But he was already looking, and the expression that transformed his face made something in her chest crack open. It wasn't disgust or pity or morbid curiosity. It was rage, pure, cold, controlled fury that made the air around him seem to vibrate with barely contained violence. He spoke again in his language, words that sounded like curses even though she couldn't understand them. Then he forced his voice back to that careful, deliberate English. "Who did this? Who hurt you this way?" "My husband," she whispered, and saying it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "My husband and his brothers. They said I was worthless. They made sure everyone would know." She felt rather than saw him processing this information. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped even lower, vibrating with something that might have been a promise or a threat. "Husband does not hurt wife like this. This is not husband. This is monster." The word monster hung in the air between them, and Lila felt a laugh bubble up from some hysterical place inside her. Jacob, with his fine suits and his Bible and his position in San Antonio society, called this man savage. But it was Jacob who had held her down while his brothers took turns with the branding iron. Jacob who had thrown her from the wagon like garbage. Jacob who had told her that no one would believe her even if she survived to tell the tale. "I'm going to die out here," she said, and it was simply a statement of fact, delivered without emotion because she had no emotion left to give it. That's what they wanted. That's what's going to happen. "No." Kaya said the word with such finality that it cut through the fog of resignation that had settled over her. "No, you will not die today. I will not permit it." "You can't stop it," she said. "You can't stop any of it. It's already done." He leaned closer, and she found herself looking into those deep eyes, seeing something there that she hadn't seen in any human face in so long she'd forgotten it existed. Hope, determination, the kind of absolute certainty that can move mountains or save dying women in the thorns. "I am Kaya," he said, "of the Penateca Comanche, and I am very good at stopping things that others think cannot be stopped. Now I will pick you up, and it will hurt, and you may scream or hit me or curse, and this is acceptable. But I will not leave you here to die. Do you understand?" She wanted to tell him it was useless, that she was too broken, that death had already claimed her, and it was just a matter of time before her body accepted what her spirit already knew. But there was something in his face, in his voice, that made argument impossible. "It hurts," she whispered instead. "I know," he said, and the gentleness in those two words nearly broke her. "It will hurt more before it hurts less. But you have survived this long. You can survive a little longer." He moved then, positioning himself with clear expertise, and she realized he'd done this before. Carried injured people, assessed the best way to move someone in pain. His arm slid beneath her knees while the other supported her shoulders, carefully avoiding the wounded expanse of her back. "Ready?" he asked. She wasn't. She would never be ready, but she nodded anyway, and he lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. The world exploded into pain, her vision whited out, and somewhere very far away she heard someone screaming. It took her several seconds to realize the screaming was coming from her own throat. She felt Kaya's arms tighten around her, heard him speaking in low, soothing tones in his own language, words that flowed like water over stone even though she couldn't understand them. He carried her to the horse, which stood steady despite her screaming, and she had the distant thought that this animal was better trained than any she'd ever seen. Kaya spoke to the horse, actually spoke to it like it was a person, and the paint lowered itself slightly, bending its front legs in a kind of bow that she'd never seen a horse perform before. "I will put you on Windrunner," Kaya said. "Then I will climb up behind you. You will lean against me, and I will hold you so you do not fall. The ride will not be long, but it will be painful, you understand?" She managed a tiny nod, though consciousness was starting to slip away again, darkness creeping in from the edges of her vision like floodwater. Kaya lifted her onto the horse with movements so careful and precise they must have been choreographed. She felt the solid warmth of the animal beneath her, felt Kaya swing up behind her with athletic grace, felt his arms come around her to hold the reins while simultaneously keeping her upright. "Lean back," he said softly. "I have you. You cannot fall." She let herself fall back against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. His arms formed a cage around her that felt nothing like a trap and everything like safety, And that couldn't be right. That went against everything she'd been taught. But she was so tired and it hurt so much, and she just wanted to rest. "Where are you taking me?" she managed to ask as the horse began to move, its gait so smooth it barely jostled her at all. "To my camp," Kaya said. "To the healers, to safety." "They'll come looking for me," she whispered. "Jacob will come. He'll say you kidnapped me. He'll bring men with guns." She felt Kaya's chest rumble with something that wasn't quite a laugh. "Let them come," he said. "We have been dealing with men like your Jacob for many years. We know how to send them home with their tails between their legs like beaten dogs." Despite everything, the pain, the fear, the certainty that she was hallucinating this entire impossible scenario, Lila felt the corner of her mouth twitch in something that might have been a smile. "Why are you helping me?" she asked as the prairie rolled by beneath them, the sun finally cresting the horizon in a blaze of gold and pink that hurt to look at. Kaya was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested the answer was more complicated than the question. "Because I am not the savage you were taught to fear, Sad," he said. "Because in my culture, we do not throw away women like broken tools. Because my mother was left to die once by white men who thought her life worthless, and a Mexican trader found her and brought her to safety, and that is why I am alive today." He paused, and she felt his arms tighten almost imperceptibly around her. "And because when I saw you in those thorns, still fighting to live despite everything that had been done to you, I saw the kind of strength that deserves to be honored, not abandoned." Tears tracked down Lila's cheeks, cutting paths through the dust and blood. She couldn't remember the last time she'd cried. Not in the wagon, not when they'd branded her, not through any of it. But this simple act of kindness from a stranger she'd been taught to fear cracked something open inside her chest, and the tears came like rain after drought. "I'm going to get your shirt wet," she mumbled, trying for humor and failing miserably. "Shirt's dry," Kaya said simply. "Tears are water for the soul. Let them come." The ride seemed to last both forever and no time at all. Pain turned the world into a fever dream where the sky bled into the earth and the sound of hoofbeats became her heartbeat. She drifted in and out of consciousness, surfacing occasionally to find herself still held securely, still moving across the prairie, still somehow inexplicably alive. At some point, the landscape began to change. She became aware of trees, real trees, not just the scattered mesquite and scrub oak, but cottonwoods and willows that spoke of water. The sound of the horse's hooves changed too, going from the soft thud of grass to something harder, and she realized they were crossing stone. "Almost there," Kaya said, his voice close to her ear. "Stay with me a little longer." She tried to focus, forcing her eyes to open when they wanted to stay closed. Through the haze of pain and exhaustion, she saw what looked like a small valley nestled between low hills, a creek winding through its center. And along the creek, she saw them. Hide lodges rising like organic sculptures from the earth, smoke rising from cooking fires, horses grazing in makeshift corrals, and people, dozens of people, going about the business of life. A Comanche camp. She was being taken to a Comanche camp. Every horror story she'd ever heard came rushing back. The warnings from the pulpit about savages who scalped their victims alive. The whispered tales women shared about tortures too terrible to speak aloud in decent company. The drawings in newspapers of fearsome warriors standing over mutilated bodies. She must have stiffened because Kaya's voice came again, calm and steady. "Breathe," he said. "No one will hurt you here. You are under my protection, and my word is law in this camp. Do you understand?" Before she could answer, a voice called out in that flowing language she couldn't understand, and Kaya called back. Within seconds, they were surrounded by people, men, women, children, all staring at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern to something that looked almost like recognition. An older woman pushed through the crowd, her hair more silver than black, her face a map of wrinkles that somehow added to rather than detracted from her beauty. She wore a dress decorated with more quillwork and beadwork than Lila had ever seen, and she moved with an authority that made it clear this was a person of importance. The woman looked at Lila, then at Kaya, then back to Lila. She said something rapid and sharp, and Kaya responded in kind. The conversation went back and forth for several exchanges, and Lila caught the older woman gesturing at her, at the blood staining her dress, at her back, though she couldn't see it. Finally, the older woman sighed and nodded. She turned to Kaya and spoke in careful English, heavily accented but clear. You bring another broken bird to my door, grandson. One day you will learn that not everything that falls from the nest can learn to fly again. And one day you will learn to stop fighting me when I bring them anyway, grandmother, Kaya replied, and despite the serious words, there was affection in his voice. Grandmother. This formidable woman was his grandmother. The older woman turned her sharp gaze on Lila, and for a moment Lila felt as if she was being read like a book, every page of her life laid open and examined. Then, seemingly satisfied with what she saw, the woman nodded once. I am called Naya, she said. I am the healer of this band. You are badly hurt, child. I will help you, but you must trust me. Can you do this? Trust. What a strange word to use. Trust was something Lila had given away freely once, bestowed on a man who'd spoken sweet words and made promises in front of God and witnesses. Look where that trust had gotten her. But as she looked at Naya's weathered face, at the strength and certainty in those dark eyes, at Kaya still holding her like she was something precious rather than garbage, she found herself nodding. I don't have much choice, do I? She whispered. Naya's lips curved in what might have been a smile. There is always choice, child, even when we think we have none. You chose to survive this long. You chose to let my grandson help you. These are not small choices. She turned and barked orders in her own language, and immediately people began moving with purpose. Kaya dismounted with that same fluid grace, then carefully lifted Lila down. Two younger women appeared at his side, both dressed in buckskin dresses decorated with shells and beads, both regarding Lila with expressions of sympathy that made her throat tight. This is Morning Star, Kaya said, gesturing to the taller of the two, a woman perhaps in her mid-20s with hair so long it nearly reached her waist. And this is Bluebird. The second woman was younger, maybe 20, with a round face and eyes that sparkled with barely contained curiosity. They will help grandmother with your care, Kaya continued. They do not speak much English, but they are gentle and skilled. You will be safe with them. Where will you be? Lila asked, and hated the panic that crept into her voice. This man was a stranger. She'd known him for perhaps an hour. But he'd saved her life and held her with kindness, and the thought of him leaving filled her with a terror that defied logic. Kaya met her eyes, and she saw understanding there. I will be close, he said. I must tend to Windrunner and speak with my uncle about what has happened, but I will not go far. If you need me, you call my name and I will hear you. Yes? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Naya said something sharp, and Morning Star and Bluebird moved to either side of Lila, supporting her weight between them. Together they began walking toward the largest of the lodges, a structure perhaps 15 feet in diameter, with smoke rising from the peak. Lila looked back once and found Kaya watching her, his face unreadable in the morning light. Then the women were guiding her through the entrance of the lodge, and she stepped from the familiar world she knew, no matter how cruel it had been, into something entirely unknown. The interior of the lodge was dim and cool, the walls lined with what looked like woven mats and decorated hides. A fire burned in the center, the smoke rising to escape through the opening at the top. The smell was unfamiliar, sage and cedar and something medicinal she couldn't name, but not unpleasant. They laid her down on a pile of buffalo robes, and the softness of it made her want to weep. After days in the wagon and hours on the ground, the simple comfort of something yielding beneath her body felt like the greatest luxury imaginable. Naya knelt beside her, those keen eyes assessing. The dress must come off, she said. I must see all your wounds to know how to treat them. The girls will help. This is acceptable? Lila wanted to say no, wanted to keep the torn dress as armor, wanted to hide the full extent of her shame. But she found herself nodding because what did modesty matter now? Let them see. Let them be horrified. Let them understand exactly what kind of monster wore a man's face and called himself a husband. Morning Star and Bluebird began working at the remains of her dress with gentle fingers, cutting away fabric that had dried to wounds, peeling back layers of ruin. Every movement brought fresh agony, and Lila bit her lip until she tasted blood, determined not to scream again. When they finally removed the last piece of cloth, she heard Morningstar's sharp intake of breath. Bluebird said something that sounded like a prayer or a curse, and Naya was silent for a long moment before she spoke. "The men who did this," she said quietly, "they are not men. They are demons wearing human skin. What word did they burn into your back?" "Worthless," Lila whispered. "They branded me like cattle. Said I was worthless as a wife, worthless as a woman. Said no one would want me now. Said they were doing the world a favor by leaving me to die." Naya's hand came to rest on Lila's shoulder, the one part of her back that wasn't destroyed, with a touch so gentle it made Lila's eyes sting again. "They were wrong," the old woman said with absolute certainty. "So wrong that the wrongness of it offends the spirits themselves. You are here, child. You survived what they did. That alone proves you are anything but worthless." She began giving orders in her language again, and Morningstar and Bluebird scattered, returning moments later with bowls and bundles and implements Lila couldn't identify. Naya began mixing something in a bowl, crushing leaves and roots with practiced efficiency, adding water until it formed a paste. "This will hurt at first," Naya warned, "but then it will numb the pain and help the wounds heal clean. You must be strong a little longer. Can you do this?" Lila nodded, bracing herself. She'd survived the branding. She'd survived being thrown from the wagon. She'd survived crawling through the thorns. She could survive this too. When the paste touched her back, white-hot agony exploded through her body. She screamed, couldn't help it, and felt hands holding her down, heard voices speaking in soothing tones she couldn't understand. But Naya was right. After the initial fire came a blessed coolness, a numbing that spread across her ravaged skin like mercy itself. "Good," Naya said. "Good, child. The worst is over." But Lila knew that wasn't true. The worst wasn't over. The worst might never be over. Because even if her body healed, even if the wounds closed and the scars faded, how did you heal from knowing that the man who vowed to love and honor you saw you as worth less than the cattle he branded? How did you come back from being thrown away like garbage? She felt consciousness slipping away again. Exhaustion and pain and the medicine all conspiring to drag her down into darkness. As she fell, she heard Naya speaking, the words echoing like they came from very far away. "Sleep now, little one. Sleep and heal. You are safe here. You are valued here. And when you wake, we will teach you something your demons never wanted you to know. That a woman's worth cannot be measured by the men who fail her, only by the strength she carries inside herself." Darkness rose like a tide, and Lila let it take her, surrendering to sleep with the smell of sage in her nostrils and the warmth of the lodge surrounding her like an embrace. When she finally slipped under, she dreamed not of thorns and brands and hatred, but of a paint horse running across a prairie painted gold by sunset, and a voice calling her name in a language she didn't yet understand but somehow knew meant safe. Lila woke to the sound of women singing. The melody was unfamiliar, rising and falling in patterns that felt ancient, as if the song itself had been born from the earth and wind. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was, couldn't place the smoky smell or the warmth surrounding her or the strange softness beneath her body. Then memory returned in a crushing wave, the thorns, the pain, Kaya, the camp, and she tried to sit up. "Easy, easy." Hands pressed gently on her shoulders, and Bluebird's round face swam into focus above her. The young woman was smiling, speaking in her own language, but the tone was soothing. She helped Lila settle back onto the robes and offered her a cup made from what looked like a gourd. The liquid inside smelled like mint and something else, something bitter. Lila hesitated, and Bluebird made an exaggerated drinking motion, then patted her own stomach and smiled even wider. Medicine, then. Or at least something meant to help. Lila drank, and the bitterness made her grimace, but underneath it she tasted honey that made it bearable. Bluebird nodded approvingly and took the cup back, chattering away in Comanche as if Lila could understand every word. There was something comforting about it, about being spoken to like a person rather than a problem, even if the words themselves remained meaningless. Morningstar entered the lodge carrying a bundle wrapped in soft leather. She saw that Lila was awake and said something to Bluebird that made both women laugh, a sound so normal and light that it seemed impossible in the midst of everything else. Morningstar knelt beside the pile of robes and carefully unwrapped the bundle, revealing what looked like a dress made of deerskin, pale and buttery soft, decorated with small blue beads and patterns that reminded Lila of water flowing. Morningstar held it up and spoke, and though Lila couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear enough. For you, to wear. I can't accept this, Lila said, though even as she spoke she realized how ridiculous the protest was. What was she going to wear? The tatters of her wedding dress. It's too fine. I don't deserve... But Morningstar was already shaking her head, her expression firm. She said something else and Bluebird chimed in, both women talking at once until Naya's voice cut through from the entrance of the lodge. They say the dress was made for Morningstar's sister, who crossed to the spirit world 3 winters ago in childbirth, Naya translated as she entered, carrying another bundle. Morningstar says her sister would be honored to have it worn by another survivor, another fighter. To refuse would dishonor her sister's memory. You understand? Lila looked at the dress, at the careful beadwork that must have taken hours, at the softness that spoke of skilled hands and patient work. A gift from the dead to the living, passed through the hands of women who owed her nothing but gave anyway. Thank you, she whispered, and Morningstar's face broke into a smile that transformed her from pretty to radiant. Over the next hour, with more gentleness than Lila thought possible, the 3 women helped her bathe using warm water from the creek and soft cloths that smelled like sage. They washed the blood and dirt from her hair, untangled the matted strands, and worked some kind of oil through it that made it shine like it hadn't in months. They reapplied Naya's medicine to her back, which still hurt but with a distant quality now, as if the pain belonged to someone else. Then came the dress, slipping over her head like water, settling across her shoulders with barely any weight at all. It fit as if it had been made for her, and when Bluebird held up a polished piece of what might have been obsidian to serve as a mirror, Lila barely recognized the woman staring back. Without the ruin of her wedding dress, without the visible markers of what had been done to her, she looked almost human again, almost whole. The dress transformed her from victim to person, and the simple act of being clean, of wearing something beautiful, cracked something open in her chest that she'd thought had been sealed forever. You look like yourself again, Naya said softly. Or perhaps you look like who you were always meant to be, before cruel men tried to break what they could never understand. Before Lila could respond, a voice called from outside the lodge. Male, speaking in English with that same careful pronunciation Kaya used. Grandmother, is she awake? May I enter? Naya smiled, the expression making her look decades younger. My grandson wishes to see that you survived the night. He has been pacing outside this lodge since before dawn like a wolf guarding its den. Should I tell him to keep waiting, or are you ready to face the man who saved your life? Lila's hands went automatically to her hair, trying to smooth it, then felt foolish. What did it matter how she looked? But somehow it did matter, though she couldn't have explained why even to herself. He can come in, she said, and was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Naya called out in Comanche, and a moment later Kaya ducked through the entrance. In the daylight streaming through the lodge's opening, Lila saw him more clearly than she had before. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with shoulders that spoke of strength tempered by work rather than show. He wore different clothes today, leggings and a shirt decorated with what she now recognized as quill work in patterns of red and yellow. His hair was tied back with a strip of leather, and there was something in his face as he looked at her that made her breath catch. Relief. He looked relieved to see her alive, as if her survival mattered to him personally. You are awake, he said, and she heard the smile in his voice even though his expression remained controlled. This is good. Grandmother said you would live, but she has been wrong before. I have never been wrong, Naya said with mock severity. You simply misheard me that one time with the wounded coyote. The coyote died, grandmother. I said it would die peacefully, and it did. That is not being wrong. That is you not listening carefully. Naya gathered up her bundles and nodded at Morningstar and Bluebird, speaking rapidly in Comanche. The 2 younger women followed her toward the entrance, both glancing back at Lila with expressions that might have been encouraging or mischievous or both. Then they were gone, and Lila was alone in the lodge with Kaya, and the silence stretched between them like something physical. How is your back? He asked finally, moving no closer but watching her with that same intensity she'd noticed before. "It hurts," she admitted, "but less than it did. Your grandmother's medicine is powerful." She learned from her grandmother, who learned from hers, going back to the first people who walked this land. Kaya paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "I came to tell you that I sent scouts to watch the trail. If your husband comes looking for you, we will know before he arrives." The word husband hung in the air between them like poison. Lila felt her hands clench in the soft deerskin of her dress. "He'll come," she said, "not because he wants me back, but because I'm his property. In his mind, in the law's mind, I belong to him like his horse or his house. He won't let that go, even if he tried to kill me." Kaya's jaw tightened. "You are not property. You are a person. This is truth. That's not how the law sees it. That's not how anyone will see it." Lila heard the bitterness in her own voice and hated it. Hated that Jacob and his brothers had reduced her to this, angry and broken and trapped even here, miles from civilization. "When he comes, he'll have papers, marriage certificates, maybe even a warrant claiming you kidnapped me. The army will side with him. They always side with white men against—" She stopped herself, but too late. The word hung unspoken between them. "Against savages?" Kaya finished, and there was no heat in his voice, only a tired acknowledgement of reality. "You were taught to fear us, to see us as animals. This is what your people do. They make us into monsters so they can take our land and kill our families and sleep well at night. I understand this. I do not like it, but I understand it." "I'm sorry," Lila whispered. I don't think you're monsters. Not after what you've done for me. But they will. Jacob will. And he has the law on his side." Kaya moved then, crossing the lodge to sit near her but not too close, respecting the distance even as he leaned forward with his forearms resting on his knees. "Let me tell you a story," he said. "When I was 16 winters old, the Texas Rangers came to our winter camp. They had papers too, papers that said we were on land that belonged to white ranchers, even though our people had lived on that land since before white men knew this country existed. They killed my father and 2 of my uncles. They took the women and children prisoner, planning to move us to a reservation." His voice remained steady, but Lila could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and released as he spoke. "My mother was one of those women. I watched them tie her hands and put her on a wagon with my little sister. I was hiding in the rocks. My father had told me to run and hide, and like a coward, I did." He paused, and when he continued, his voice was softer. "A Mexican trader named Rodrigo was traveling with the Rangers selling supplies. He saw my mother, saw how roughly they treated her, and he did something I still do not fully understand. He bought her and my sister from the Rangers, paid actual money for them like they were goods. Then he took them away from the soldiers and brought them to a friendly Comanche band 2 days' ride away. He freed them. He saved them." Lila found herself leaning forward, drawn into the story despite herself. Why? Why would he do that? I asked him that once, years later, when I finally had a chance to thank him. Kaya's lips curved in a small smile. He said, "Because I saw a woman who loved her daughter, and that kind of love deserves to live. Because sometimes the law is wrong, and a man must choose between being legal and being human. I chose human. That is why I picked you up from the thorns, Lila Carter. Not because the law says I should. The law would say I should have left you to die, or worse, but because I choose to be human." The way he said her name, with that slight accent that softened the L and drew out the A, made it sound like something new, like she was being christened into a different life. "What happened to Rodrigo?" she asked. "He is still alive, still traveling the trade routes, still being more human than most men I have known. He comes to our camp sometimes, brings news from the settlements, takes our goods to sell in San Antonio." Kaya's expression grew serious again. "And when your husband comes, because you are right that he will come, Rodrigo will be part of how we handle it. Him and a lawyer in San Antonio who owes my uncle a debt. Men with papers, fighting papers with papers. That is how this must be done." Lila shook her head. "You don't understand how these things work. Jacob's family is wealthy, connected. They have judges in their pocket. No lawyer will go against them for—" She gestured at herself, at the lodge, at everything around them. "For this. For me." You do not give yourself enough value, Kaya said quietly. But that will change. Time and safety will teach you what cruelty tried to destroy, that you are worth fighting for. Before she could respond, voices rose outside the lodge, urgent, speaking rapid Comanche. Kaya was on his feet instantly, moving to the entrance. An older man appeared, speaking quickly, and even without understanding the words, Lila could hear the warning in his tone. Kaya turned back to her, and his face had transformed into something harder, more dangerous. Your husband has come faster than we expected. He rides with 6 men, all armed. They are 2 miles from camp, approaching from the east. He paused, measuring his words. You have a choice to make, Lila Carter. You can hide in this lodge while we send them away. Or you can face him, with us beside you, and take back the power he tried to steal. Lila's heart hammered against her ribs. Face Jacob. Face the man who had held her down while his brothers burned her skin. Face the monster in a man's suit who had thrown her away to die. Every instinct screamed at her to hide, to make herself small, to survive by being invisible the way she'd learned to survive in his house. But something else was rising in her chest, something hot and sharp that felt like rage mixed with desperation, mixed with the simple, stubborn refusal to let him win. If I hide, she said slowly, he'll tell everyone I was kidnapped. He'll use it as an excuse to bring soldiers back to destroy this place. People will die because of me. That is possible, Kaya acknowledged, but it is not your fault. The evil men do in the name of possessing women cannot be placed on the shoulders of the women themselves. But if I face him, if I tell him in front of witnesses that I left him, that I choose to stay here, then you become a woman who abandoned her husband for savages, and his story becomes one of a betrayed man instead of a violent one. Kaya crossed back to her, and this time he did close the distance, kneeling so they were eye to eye. There is no choice here that does not have consequences. You must decide which consequences you can live with. What do you want, Lila? Not what is safe, not what is expected, but what do you want? The question hit her like a physical blow. What did she want? When was the last time anyone had asked her that? When was the last time her wants had mattered at all? I want him to know he didn't break me, she heard herself say. I want him to see me alive and whole and choosing to walk away from him. I want him to know that his worthless wife survived everything he did and found people who saw her value even when he couldn't. Something fierce and approving flashed in Kaya's eyes. Then that is what we will give you. Can you stand? Can you walk? She nodded, and he helped her to her feet. The movement pulled at her back, sent spikes of pain through her shoulders, but she gritted her teeth and stayed upright. Kaya kept his hand on her arm, steadying but not controlling, and together they walked to the entrance of the lodge. Outside, the camp had transformed. Warriors stood in a loose semicircle, armed with rifles and bows, their faces painted with designs she didn't understand but that clearly meant something. Women gathered behind them, some holding children, all watching with expressions that ranged from curiosity to concern. And in the center of it all stood an older man who could only be Kaya's uncle, the same sharp cheekbones and dark eyes, but seasoned by years and responsibility. The man looked at Lila, then at Kaya, and said something in Comanche that made Kaya respond with obvious respect. The uncle nodded slowly, then spoke in careful English. I am Standing Hawk, war chief of this band. My nephew tells me you wish to face the white men who hurt you. This is brave but dangerous. You understand they may try to take you by force? I understand, Lila said, and was proud that her voice didn't shake. And you understand that if they try this, we will stop them, and there may be blood? I understand that too. Standing Hawk studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Then you will stand with us, and we will stand with you. But you must let us speak first. You must let us handle this the way of leaders and treaties, not the way of guns. Only if they reach for weapons will we do the same. This is acceptable? Yes. Good. Standing Hawk turned and barked orders, and warriors moved into position, visible but not aggressive, armed but not aiming. A delegation, not an ambush. Naya appeared at Lila's other side, pressing something into her hand. Lila looked down and saw a knife in a beaded sheath, small but wickedly sharp. Just in case, the old woman said softly. You have been thrown away once. You will not be taken against your will again. Not while we draw breath. The sound of approaching horses echoed across the prairie, and Lila's stomach clenched. She knew that rhythm, Jacob's big bay gelding, the one he loved more than he'd ever loved her. The horse that ate better than she had some weeks, that slept in a clean stall while she slept in a room that leaked when it rained. They appeared over the rise, 7 riders, just as Kaya had said. Jacob at the front on his bay, his brothers Samuel and Thomas flanking him, and 4 other men Lila recognized as ranch hands from the Carter property. All of them were armed with rifles. All of them were scanning the camp with expressions that mixed fear and aggression in equal measure. Jacob's eyes found her almost immediately, standing there between Kaya and Naya in her deerskin dress, her hair clean and loose around her shoulders, alive when she should have been dead. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, relief, rage, and something else she couldn't name. "Lila," his voice cracked across the space between them like a whip. "Thank God, I've been searching for days. These savages kidnapped you, but don't worry, we're here to bring you home." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment Lila almost believed it herself. This was the Jacob who spoke in church, who smiled at neighbors, who presented the face of a respectable businessman to the world. Not the Jacob who held a branding iron or threw his wife from a moving wagon. Standing Hawk stepped forward, his hand raised in a gesture that was clearly meant to be peaceful. "I am Standing Hawk. The woman came to us wounded and dying. We gave her shelter and healing. No one has kidnapped anyone." "You expect me to believe that?" Jacob's voice dripped with scorn. "My wife disappears from our home, and I find her here, dressed like one of you, clearly being held against her will. I have every right to take back what's mine." What's mine? Not who, but what? Property, possession. Lila felt something snap inside her chest, something that had been bent and strained but not quite broken until this moment. She stepped forward, out from between Kaya and Naya, ignoring the pain that lanced through her back. "I'm not yours," she said, and her voice carried across the camp clear and strong. "I was never yours, Jacob. I was a human being you fooled into trusting you, and then you tried to destroy me when I couldn't give you what you wanted." Jacob's face flushed red. "Lila, you don't know what you're saying. You're clearly confused, probably drugged. These savages have—" "Stop calling them that!" The words exploded from her with enough force to make Jacob's horse sidestep. "They saved my life. They gave me medicine and clothes and kindness while you and your brothers held me down and branded me like an animal, while you threw me from a wagon and left me to die in the wilderness." A shocked silence fell over the camp. Even Standing Hawk looked surprised by the vehemence in her voice. But Lila wasn't done, couldn't be done, because 3 months of silence and swallowed words were pouring out of her like floodwater. "You want to know what happened, Jacob? You want to tell everyone how you're the victim here?" She reached back and with Naya's help, pulled the dress down just enough to expose the top of the brand on her shoulder. "You did this. You and Samuel and Thomas. You burned your verdict into my skin because I couldn't give you a son, because I had the audacity to be barren, as if that was somehow a choice I made instead of just biology. And when even that wasn't enough to satisfy your cruelty, you threw me away." Jacob's jaw worked, but no sound came out. His brothers looked at each other uncomfortably. One of the ranch hands was staring at the ground as if he wished it would swallow him. "I should have died out there," Lila continued, and she felt tears streaming down her face but didn't care. "That's what you wanted. That's what you planned. But Kaya found me. He brought me here. These people, these savages you despise, they treated me with more humanity in one day than you showed me in 3 months of marriage. So no, Jacob, I won't go with you. I won't let you take me back to that house where every room smells like my own fear. I choose to stay here, with people who see me as a person instead of property." "You can't choose that." Jacob's horse danced as his hands tightened on the reins. "You're my wife. We're married in the eyes of God and the law. You belong—" "I belong to myself," Lila shouted. "The only person who ever had the right to decide my future was me. And I gave that away once because I believed your lies about love and protection. I won't make that mistake again." Jacob's hand moved toward the rifle on his saddle, and instantly every Comanche warrior raised their weapons. The click of hammers being pulled back echoed like thunder, and Jacob froze. Standing Hawk's voice cut through the tension like a blade. You will not touch your weapon. You will not touch this woman. She has claimed sanctuary with our band, and we have granted it. This is treaty land recognized by the Republic of Texas itself. You have no authority here. Treaty land? Jacob laughed, but it sounded hollow. Those treaties aren't worth the paper they're written on, and everyone knows it. Perhaps, Standing Hawk acknowledged, but we have witnesses here, white witnesses who trade with us, and who will testify that this woman came to us wounded and chose to stay of her own free will. We have a healer who can document every injury she bears. We have warriors who will swear before any judge that no force was used to keep her here. What do you have, white man? A story about a kidnapping that no one saw? A wife who publicly refuses you? Go ahead, try to take her. But know that if you do, the blood will be on your hands, and there are men in San Antonio who would be very interested in hearing the full story of how your wife came to be branded and abandoned. Jacob's face had gone from red to pale. His eyes darted between Lila and Standing Hawk and the circle of armed warriors. She could see him calculating, weighing his options, trying to find a way to win. This isn't over, he said finally, his voice low and threatening. I'll be back with the army. I'll have papers. You'll do what you must, Standing Hawk interrupted, and we will be ready. But understand this. If you return with soldiers, you return with an army to capture one woman who has publicly refused you. You return looking like a man so weak he needs guns to control his wife. Is that the story you want spread across San Antonio? The story of Jacob Carter, who couldn't keep a woman even when the law said she belonged to him? The shot landed. Lila could see it in the way Jacob's hands tightened on his reins, in the way his brothers suddenly found the horizon very interesting. Pride and reputation were everything to men like Jacob. The thought of being mocked, of being seen as weak, was almost worse than the thought of losing her. Keep her then, Jacob spat, and the venom in his voice made something cold settle in Lila's stomach. Keep the barren bitch. She's worthless anyway, just like I told her. You'll figure that out soon enough. He wheeled his horse around and spurred it back toward the rise. His brothers and the ranch hands followed, though one of the hands looked back once with an expression that might have been sympathy or shame or both. They watched until the riders disappeared from view, and only then did Lila feel her legs start to shake. Kaya was beside her instantly, his arm supporting her weight as her knees buckled. I've got you, he said softly. You can let go now. You were so strong. You can rest. But Lila was laughing and crying at the same time, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. I told him no, she gasped out between sobs. I told him no, and he left. He actually left. You were magnificent, Naya said, appearing on her other side. Like a winter storm, beautiful and terrible and impossible to ignore. Your spirit is strong, child, stronger than those men could ever be. Standing Hawk approached, and Lila tried to straighten, tried to show proper respect to this man who had defended her, but he waved her efforts away. Rest, he said. You have fought your battle for today. He will return. Men like that always do, but not immediately. Pride must be soothed first. Lawyers must be consulted. Schemes must be planned. We have time. He looked at Kaya. Take her back to the healing lodge. Make sure she eats. She will need strength for what comes next. As Kaya helped her walk back across the camp, Lila became aware that people were watching her, not with pity or disgust, but with something that looked like respect. Morning Star and Bluebird were speaking rapidly to a group of younger women, demonstrating something with gestures that might have been reenacting her confrontation with Jacob. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts with wide, curious eyes. They're talking about you, Kaya said quietly, saying you have the heart of a warrior, that you faced down 7 armed men with nothing but words and will. This is a story that will be told around fires for many winters. I was terrified, Lila admitted. I'm still terrified. What if he does come back with soldiers? What if people die because I... Stop. Kaya's voice was gentle but firm. You cannot control what evil men do in response to your freedom. You can only control whether you let them take that freedom from you. You chose to stand. That is enough. They reached the healing lodge, and Naya was already there, preparing food and medicine and clean water. She settled Lila back onto the pile of robes and pressed a cup of broth into her hands. "Drink," the old woman commanded. "Your body needs strength after such bravery. And then you will sleep, because healing happens in the quiet places, when we let ourselves be vulnerable enough to rest." Lila drank, tasting venison and wild onions and herbs she couldn't name. The warmth of it spread through her chest, pushing back the cold fear that had settled there. She was aware of Kaya sitting nearby, not leaving, just keeping watch like he'd promised. "Why are you doing this?" she asked him after she'd drained the cup. "Really? You could have left me in those thorns. It would have been easier, safer. Why risk everything for a stranger?" Kaya was quiet for a long moment, staring at the fire burning in the center of the lodge. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested he was sharing something precious. "When I was young, maybe 10 winters old, I found a hawk with a broken wing. An eagle had attacked it, left it to die on the ground. My father told me to leave it, that interfering with nature's way was foolish. But I could not. I could not watch something beautiful die just because it had been hurt by something stronger." He looked at her then, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "I took that hawk home. I fed it, splinted its wing, protected it while it healed. My father was angry at first, said I was wasting time on something that would never fly again. But I kept trying, and one day, that hawk spread its wings and flew away, stronger than it had been before." "Did it come back?" Lila asked. Kaya smiled. "Every spring for 7 years. It would land on the lodge poles and call to me, bringing me feathers as gifts. My father said I had been blessed by the hawk spirit for my kindness, but I think the hawk was just grateful to be given a chance to fly again." He paused. "That is why I picked you up, Lila Carter, because I saw someone beautiful who had been broken by something stronger, and I could not leave you to die. And because I believe that given the chance, you will fly again too." The words settled over her like a blanket, warm and protective. She wanted to say something profound, something that matched the gift he'd given her, but exhaustion was dragging at her bones. "Thank you," she whispered finally, "for everything, for seeing me." "Rest now," Kaya said. "I will keep watch. You are safe." And despite everything, despite Jacob and the threat of his return, despite the uncertainty of her future, despite the scars on her back and the wounds in her soul, Lila believed him. She let her eyes close, let sleep rise up to claim her, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she slept without nightmares. She didn't see Kaya watching over her through the night, or Naya checking her bandages with practiced hands, or the way the camp settled into protective vigilance around the healing lodge. She didn't see Standing Hawk posting extra guards or Morning Star and Bluebird weaving protective charms to hang above her sleeping form. She was simply held in safety, cocooned in the care of people who had chosen to value her when the world had tried to throw her away. And somewhere in the depths of that healing sleep, in a place beyond words or conscious thought, a tiny seed of hope took root in the burned and broken soil of her heart and began, just barely, to grow. The days that followed blurred together in a rhythm Lila had never known existed, soft and purposeful, built around the rising and setting of the sun rather than the demands of angry men. She woke each morning to the sound of the camp stirring to life, to the smell of cooking fires and the distant whinny of horses. And each morning the weight on her chest felt fractionally lighter. Naya changed her bandages twice daily, applying fresh medicine that smelled of yarrow and sage. The old woman's hands were never rough, never impatient, and she hummed while she worked, old songs that seemed to carry healing in their very notes. On the 5th day, when she peeled back the wrappings, she made a satisfied sound in her throat. "Good," she said, more to herself than to Lila. "Very good. The skin is closing clean, no infection. The spirits are kind to you, child. In another moon, the worst will be over." "Will the scars fade?" Lila asked, then immediately felt foolish for caring. What did it matter what her back looked like? Who would ever see it but her? But Naya didn't dismiss the question. She simply continued her work, her gnarled fingers gentle as they spread the medicine. "Some, yes. Some, no. Scars are not only marks of pain, you understand. They are also marks of survival. They say, 'I was wounded here, but I did not die.' There is honor in that. Jacob wanted them to say I was worthless. Then Jacob is a fool who does not understand what words truly mean. Naya secured fresh bandages across Lila's back. Worthless is a word for broken tools, for things that serve no purpose. You are not a thing. You are a woman who crawled through thorns when she could have laid down and died. You are a woman who faced 7 armed men and did not blink. These are not the actions of something worthless. These are the actions of someone discovering her own strength. Morning Star arrived then, carrying a wooden bowl filled with what looked like berries mixed with pemmican. She offered it to Lila with a shy smile and said something in Comanche that made Naya laugh. "She says you need to eat more," Naya translated. "She says you are too thin, like a bird in winter, and how can you fight if you have no strength in your body?" Lila took the bowl, surprised by how hungry she actually was. "Tell her thank you. Tell her she's been very kind to a stranger." Naya relayed the message, and Morning Star's response was immediate and emphatic, her hands moving in gestures as she spoke. Naya's expression softened as she listened. "She says you are not a stranger anymore. She says when you stood up to those white men, when you refused to let them take you, you became her sister. She says any woman brave enough to choose freedom over safety deserves to be protected by other women." Naya paused, studying Lila's face. "In our way, family is not always blood. Sometimes it is choice. Morning Star has chosen you as sister. This is a great honor." Something hot pressed behind Lila's eyes. She looked at Morning Star, at this woman who had bathed her wounds and given her clothes, and sat with her through the worst moments, and felt something crack open in her chest. "Tell her," Lila's voice broke. "Tell her I would be honored to call her sister." Morning Star's face transformed with joy when Naya translated. She reached out and took Lila's hand, squeezing it gently, then spoke again in rapid Comanche. "She says tomorrow you will begin learning our ways," Naya said. "If you are to stay with us, you must learn how to live with us. She will teach you to prepare food, to work leather, to understand the plants that heal and the ones that harm. Bluebird will teach you our language. It is settled." "I don't know how long I'll stay," Lila said quietly. "Jacob might come back with lawyers or soldiers or—" "Then you will deal with that when it happens," Naya interrupted. "But today you are here and tomorrow you will be here, and that is enough. The future is smoke. You cannot hold it in your hands. Learn to live in the moment you have, child, or you will spend your whole life running from ghosts." The words settled over Lila like a benediction, and she found herself nodding. What else could she do? Where else could she go? San Antonio held nothing for her but shame and judgment. Jacob's house was a prison she'd rather die than return to. And out here, in this camp full of people she'd been taught to fear, she'd found more kindness in a week than she'd known in years. That afternoon, Bluebird arrived with a leather bag full of items and a determined expression. She settled cross-legged beside Lila and began pulling things out, a piece of tanned hide, an awl, sinew thread, beads in various colors. She held up the hide and said something, tapping it with her finger. "Naki," Bluebird said clearly, then repeated it. "Naki." "Naki," Lila echoed, and Bluebird's face lit up. She pointed to the awl. "Tosabitu." "Tosabitu." For the next hour, Bluebird patiently taught her words in Comanche while showing her how to punch holes in leather and thread them with sinew. The work was painstaking, requiring a delicacy Lila's hands seemed to have forgotten, but Bluebird never lost patience. When Lila fumbled and dropped the awl, Bluebird simply picked it up and demonstrated again, slower this time, making sure Lila could see exactly how to hold it. They were so focused on their work that neither of them noticed Kaya's arrival until his shadow fell across their workspace. Lila looked up to find him watching with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You are learning the language," he said, and was that approval in his voice? "Trying to," Lila admitted. "I'm not very good at it yet." "Language is like a river," Kaya said, settling down nearby. "You cannot drink all of it at once. You must take small sips until the taste becomes familiar. Bluebird is a good teacher. She taught my youngest cousin to speak, and he was stubborn as a mule." Bluebird said something that made Kaya laugh, and he responded in kind. The easy affection between them was obvious, and Lila felt a pang of something that might have been envy. To have people who laughed with you, who taught you patiently, who looked at you with fondness instead of disappointment. When had she last experienced that? I brought you something, Kaya said, switching back to English. He held out a pair of moccasins, beautifully made with beadwork in patterns of blue and white. Your feet are healing, but you cannot walk barefoot forever. These were my mother's. She would want you to have them. Lila stared at the moccasins, at the careful stitching and the hours of work they represented. I can't take your mother's shoes. Spirit world these 3 years, Kaya said gently. Her things should be used by the living, not gathering dust in my lodge. Besides, I think she would like you. You have her stubbornness, her refusal to accept defeat even when everything seems lost. The comparison made Lila's throat tight. You honor me by saying so. I speak truth, not honor. Kaya set the moccasins beside her. Try them. If they do not fit, I will find others. Lila slipped them on, and they fit as if they'd been made for her feet specifically. The soft leather molded to her skin, comfortable in a way her stiff leather boots had never been. She stood carefully, testing them, and found she could walk without pain for the first time since the thorns. They're perfect, she said. Thank you. Kaya nodded, but his eyes held something deeper than simple acknowledgement. He looked like he wanted to say more, but Bluebird interrupted with an insistent stream of Comanche, gesturing at the leatherwork. Kaya translated with obvious amusement. She says you are distracting her student and must leave unless you plan to help. She is very fierce about teaching, my sister. Your sister? Lila looked between them, seeing the resemblance now in the shape of their eyes, the set of their jaws. My younger sister, Kaya confirmed. She lost her husband to the spotted sickness 2 winters ago. She lives in my lodge now, along with our grandmother. He stood, brushing dust from his leggings. I will leave you to your lessons. But tonight there will be a gathering around the fire, stories and songs. You should come if you feel strong enough. It is good for the spirit to see joy, not just survival. After he left, Bluebird gave Lila a knowing look and said something that needed no translation. The teasing was evident in her tone, and Lila felt heat rise in her cheeks. We're not, she stammered, but Bluebird just laughed and went back to the leatherwork, humming a tune that sounded suspiciously cheerful. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Morning Star arrived to help Lila prepare for the gathering. She brought a comb made from porcupine quills and sat behind Lila, carefully working through the tangles in her hair with patient hands. The intimacy of it, having another woman care for her appearance with such focus, made Lila's eyes sting. My mother used to do this, she said softly, not sure if Morning Star could understand, but needing to say it anyway. Before she died, she'd brush my hair every night and tell me stories about when she was young. I'd forgotten how much I missed it. Morning Star responded in Comanche, her voice gentle, and though Lila couldn't understand the words, she understood the tone. Comfort, understanding, shared grief for mothers lost. When Morning Star finished, she produced a small mirror, actual glass, probably traded from white settlements, and held it up. Lila barely recognized the woman looking back. Her hair shone, neatly braided with small blue beads woven through. Her face had regained some color. The deerskin dress fit her like it belonged there. She looked almost beautiful, or at least she looked like someone who might become beautiful again, with time. They walked together to the center of camp, where a large fire had been built, and people were already gathering. Children ran between the lodges, laughing and playing games that needed no translation. Warriors sat in clusters, some cleaning weapons, others simply talking in low voices. Women worked on various tasks, sewing, weaving, preparing food. Their hands never idle, even as they socialized. Naya waved them over to a spot near the fire, and Lila settled onto the buffalo robe that had been laid out. Morning Star sat beside her, and soon Bluebird joined them, bringing wooden bowls filled with some kind of stew that smelled incredible. Eat, Naya commanded, handing Lila a bowl and a carved wooden spoon. You need strength, and my daughter makes the best buffalo stew in 3 bands. Lila looked at Morning Star with surprise. Your daughter? I birthed her from my body, yes, Naya said with obvious pride. Though some days I wonder if the spirit switched my sweet baby for a stubborn wildcat when I was not looking. She gets her fierce heart from her father, who was a great warrior. Morningstar said something that made Naya swat at her playfully, and both women laughed. The easy affection between them made Lila's chest ache with something that felt like longing mixed with grief. Her own mother had died when Lila was 16, and her father had been distant even before that, more interested in his ledgers than his daughter. She'd never had this warmth, this belonging, this sense of being woven into a family rather than just occupying space in it. As darkness fell and the fire grew brighter, the gathering took on a different character. An old man with a drum began to play, the rhythm steady as a heartbeat, and several people began to sing. The melody was haunting, rising and falling in patterns that seemed to echo the landscape itself, the roll of prairies, the curve of rivers, the cry of hawks overhead. Kaya appeared from the darkness and settled on the other side of the fire, and Lila found her eyes drawn to him despite her best efforts to look elsewhere. In the firelight, his features seemed carved from shadow and flame, beautiful in a way that made her chest constrict. He caught her looking and smiled, a small private expression that made heat rise in her cheeks. Standing Hawk rose to his feet, and the singing quieted. He began to speak in Comanche, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. And though Lila couldn't understand the words, she could hear the power in them. Naya leaned close to translate in whispers. "He tells the story of how our people came to this land," Naya murmured. "How we were once part of a different tribe far to the north, but the spirits called us south, to the land of the buffalo and the endless sky." He speaks of the ancestors who made that journey, of the hardships they faced, of how they became strong by surviving what tried to break them. The story went on, and Lila found herself drawn into it despite the language barrier. She watched Standing Hawk's face, saw the passion there, the reverence for the history he carried. When he finished, another person stood, a woman this time, and began her own story, something that made people laugh and clap. She tells of the time her husband tried to impress her by catching the chief's fastest horse, Naya translated with a chuckle. He chased that horse for 3 days, and only caught it because it got tired of running and stopped to eat grass. She says this taught her that sometimes the best hunters are simply the most stubborn. More stories followed, some serious, some funny, all of them woven together into a tapestry of shared experience and communal memory. Lila realized this was how they kept their history alive, not in written books that could be burned or lost, but in stories told around fires, passed from one generation to the next, living and breathing and changing with each telling. Then Kaya stood, and the crowd quieted with an anticipation that suggested he was a known storyteller. He began to speak, and even without translation, Lila could hear the rhythm of it, the poetry and the cadence. Naya's translation came in fragments, whispered between beats. He speaks of the hawk with the broken wing, of finding beauty in broken things, of how healing requires both patience and faith, of how sometimes what we save ends up saving us in return. Lila's breath caught as she realized he was telling their story, or a version of it, wrapped in metaphor and shaped for this audience. He didn't name her, didn't point her out, but several people glanced in her direction as he spoke. When he finished, the silence that followed felt weighted with understanding. An older woman stood and said something to Kaya that made him nod seriously. Naya's translation came quickly. She says the hawk spirit is strong in him, that it has guided him to do good work. She blesses the hawk and the woman it protects. Naya squeezed Lila's hand. That is White Dove. She is our spiritual leader. Her blessing is not given lightly. As the night wore on and more stories were told, Lila felt something shifting inside her. These people, these supposed savages, had more humanity in their smallest gestures than Jacob's entire family possessed in their bodies. They cared for each other, celebrated each other, held each other up in times of trouble. They made space for a broken white woman without demanding she earn her place. They simply gave because giving was what people did for each other. The gathering continued late into the night, but eventually Naya noticed Lila swaying with exhaustion. She stood, pulling Lila up with her. "Enough for your first night," the old woman said. "Your body needs rest more than your spirit needs stories. Come. Morningstar will walk you back to the healing lodge." But before they could leave, Kaya appeared at Lila's side. "I will walk with her," he said to Naya. "You should stay and hear Thundercloud's story about the time he accidentally courted the wrong sister. It is very funny." Naya gave him a look that suggested she knew exactly what he was doing, but she nodded and shooed them away with her hands. "Go then. But remember, grandson, a woman healing from wounds needs gentle treatment. Do not rush what must unfold in its own time." Kaya's ears reddened slightly, but he simply offered Lila his arm. She took it, grateful for the support as her tired legs carried her away from the fire's warmth. They walked in silence for a moment, the sounds of the gathering fading behind them. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky in such profusion that they seemed to touch the earth itself. A cool breeze carried the scent of sage and distant water. "Your story," Lila said finally, "about the hawk. Was that—" "It was," Kaya confirmed. "Though I did not name you, everyone understood. It is our way to share experiences without exposing those who might not wish to be exposed. The lesson is learned, but privacy is respected." What did White Dove's blessing mean? Naya said it wasn't given lightly. Kaya was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. White Dove has strong dreams, visions from the spirit world. When she blesses something, she does so because she has seen in her dreams that it is meant to be. She blessed you, Lila. She blessed us. That means she has seen something in the future that involves us both, something important. "What did she see?" Lila asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know. She would not say. Visions are not always clear, and speaking of them too soon can change their meaning. But she told me privately that you carry a storm inside you, one that will either destroy you or transform you into something powerful. She said I must be patient and let you choose which way the wind blows. They had reached the healing lodge, but neither of them moved to enter. The night seemed to hold them in place, suspended in a moment that felt too fragile to break. "I don't feel powerful," Lila admitted. "I feel scared and angry and lost. I feel like I'm playing dress-up in someone else's life, wearing their clothes and eating their food, and pretending I belong here when I don't know if I belong anywhere anymore." Kaya turned to face her fully, and in the moonlight his eyes were impossibly dark and deep. "You belong where you choose to belong, not where you were born, not where someone else decides to put you, but where your heart finds peace. Give yourself time to discover where that is. And if Jacob comes back, if he brings soldiers or lawyers then we will face that when it happens," Kaya said, echoing Naya's earlier words. "But Lila, you must stop letting the ghost of that man live in your head rent-free. He hurt you. He tried to destroy you, but he failed. You are here, breathing, healing, learning. He lost the moment you refused to die for his convenience." The words hit something deep inside her, some locked room she'd been afraid to open. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. And then Kaya's arms were around her, careful, gentle, not restraining, but sheltering. She sobbed against his chest while he held her, one hand stroking her hair with infinite patience. "I'm sorry," she gasped when she could finally speak. "I'm such a mess. You don't deserve to—" "Shh," he murmured. "You are healing. Healing is messy. It is not pretty or convenient or comfortable. It is hard and painful, and sometimes it breaks you open worse before it makes you whole. But you are doing it anyway. That is brave, Lila. That is so brave." She pulled back slightly to look at his face, and what she saw there made her breath catch. Not pity, not obligation. Something else, something that looked almost like wonder. "Why do you look at me like that?" she whispered. "Like what?" "Like I don't know. Like I'm something precious instead of something broken." Kaya's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away tears with infinite gentleness. "Because you are both. You are broken and precious. You are wounded and beautiful. You are learning that these things can exist together, that being hurt does not make you worthless. When I look at you, I see a woman discovering her own strength. How could I look at that with anything but wonder?" The moment stretched between them, charged with possibilities. Lila realized that if she leaned forward just slightly, their lips would touch. That if she wanted to kiss him, he would let her. That he would probably kiss her back. But Naya's words echoed in her mind. A woman healing from wounds needs gentle treatment. And she knew this wasn't the right moment. Not because she didn't want it, but because she needed to want it for the right reasons. Not as a rebellion against Jacob, not as proof that she was desirable despite the scars, but simply because she chose it freely. She stepped back, and Kaya let her go immediately, his expression understanding rather than disappointed. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for saving me, for being patient with me, for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." "You do not need to thank me for treating you like a human being," Kaya said. "That should be the baseline, not the exception. Now go inside and rest. Tomorrow morning Star will work you hard. She takes teaching very seriously, and you will need all your strength." Lila nodded and turned toward the lodge entrance, but she looked back once and found him still watching her, a slight smile on his face. "Kaya?" she called softly. "Yes?" "I'm glad it was you. I'm glad you were the one who found me in the thorns." His smile widened. "So am I, Lila. So am I." She ducked inside the lodge, her heart beating faster than it should, and settled onto the pile of robes. Through the lodge walls she could hear the distant sounds of the gathering still going on, the drum and voices blending into a song that felt like home, even though she'd only been here a week. Sleep came easier that night, and with it dreams not of brands and cruelty, but of hawks soaring above endless prairies, calling to each other in voices that sounded like freedom. The next morning began before dawn with Morning Star shaking her shoulder gently. The older woman said something in Comanche that Lila was beginning to recognize as "wake up," and handed her a piece of pemmican wrapped in leaves. "Eat quickly," Morning Star said in halting English. "Much work today. You learn." Lila ate as she dressed, still marveling at the softness of the deerskin against her healing skin. Morning Star waited patiently, then led her out into the cool pre-dawn air where several other women were already gathering. Bluebird appeared with that leather bag again, this time accompanied by an older woman Lila recognized from the gathering. Morning Star gestured to her and spoke. "Grandmother," Bluebird said in English, then rattled off something in Comanche. The older woman nodded and studied Lila with sharp eyes. What followed was an intensive education unlike anything Lila had experienced. The women led her to the creek where they showed her which plants could be eaten and which would make you sick. They demonstrated how to identify tracks left by different animals, how to read weather in the clouds, how to find water when none seemed available. Morning Star showed her how to prepare hides, scraping away the flesh and hair with a tool made from a sharpened bone, working the skin until it became supple as cloth. It was hard work, harder than anything Lila had done in Jacob's house, where her duties had been limited to cooking and cleaning and trying to become invisible when his temper rose. Her hands cramped and her back ached, and several times she wanted to give up. But every time she faltered, one of the women would demonstrate again, patient and encouraging, and Lila would try once more. At midday they stopped to eat and rest, settling in the shade of cottonwood trees while children played in the creek nearby. Bluebird was practicing English words with Lila when Standing Hawk approached with Kaya and another man Lila hadn't seen before. The stranger was white, perhaps 40, with sun-weathered skin and intelligent eyes. He wore a mixture of American and Mexican clothing, and he carried himself with the ease of someone comfortable in multiple worlds. "Lila Carter," Standing Hawk said formally, "this is Rodrigo Reyes, the trader I told you about." Rodrigo removed his hat and nodded respectfully. "Senora Carter, I have heard much about your situation. I am sorry for what was done to you." His voice held genuine sympathy, and Lila found herself warming to him immediately. "Standing Hawk said you might be able to help, but I don't understand how. Jacob has the law on his side." "The law is a tricky thing," Rodrigo said, settling down nearby. "It can be used as a weapon by cruel men, yes, but it can also be a shield for the innocent if one knows how to hold it properly. I have brought papers from San Antonio, interesting papers that suggest your husband's family has some legal troubles of their own." He pulled out a leather satchel and extracted several documents. "It seems Jacob Carter and his brothers have been accused by 3 different ranchers of stealing cattle and altering brands. There is also the small matter of unpaid debts to several merchants, and a complaint filed by a woman named Mary Henderson claiming Jacob promised to marry her before he married you." Lila's head spun. "Mary Henderson? I don't know that name." "She worked at the hotel in San Antonio," Rodrigo explained. "According to her statement, Jacob courted her seriously, promised marriage, took certain liberties with her honor, then abandoned her when he met you. a woman with a small inheritance he found more attractive. The implications hit Lila like a physical blow. Her father had left her a modest sum when he died, money that had become Jacob's the moment they married. Money he'd spent on expanding his ranch while she made do with worn dresses and watered-down soup. "He married me for money," she said flatly. "That's why he was so angry when I couldn't give him a son. I was supposed to be an investment that paid dividends, and I failed to produce." "Men like Jacob Carter see everything as transactions," Rodrigo said, his voice hard with disgust. "Women, land, cattle, all just assets to be managed. But here's where it becomes useful for us. A man with this many complaints against him, with this kind of reputation, will not be viewed favorably by judges, especially if we can demonstrate a pattern of violence and deceit." Kaya leaned forward. "What do we need to do?" "We need statements," Rodrigo said. "From Lila about what happened, from the healer about her injuries, from everyone who witnessed her confrontation with Jacob where she publicly refused him. We need to build a case that she left an abusive marriage and sought sanctuary, not that she was kidnapped. And we need to do it quickly, before Jacob can shape his own narrative." "I'll write whatever you need," Lila said, feeling strength flow back into her spine. "I'll tell everything. The brand, the abandonment, all of it." "Good." Rodrigo's smile was sharp as a blade. "Then we will make Jacob Carter regret the day he tried to throw you away. There's a lawyer in San Antonio, Marcus Blackwood, who specializes in helping women escape bad marriages. He owes me a favor, and he loves nothing more than taking down men who think their money puts them above consequences. With these papers and your testimony, we can make Jacob's life very difficult if he continues to pursue you." Standing Hawk nodded approvingly. "You will stay in my camp while this is done. You have our protection for as long as you need it." "I can't thank you enough," Lila said, looking at each of them in turn. "All of you. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever, hope." "Hope is not given," Standing Hawk said. "It is earned by surviving long enough to see tomorrow. You earned yours the moment you chose to keep crawling through those thorns instead of laying down to die." The work of building the case consumed the next week. Rodrigo brought a clerk from San Antonio who could take proper statements and notarize documents. Lila spent hours recounting every detail of her marriage to Jacob, every cruelty and manipulation and moment of fear. It was exhausting and painful, tearing open wounds that had barely begun to close, but she forced herself through it because this was her chance, perhaps her only chance, to reclaim her life. Naya provided detailed medical testimony about Lila's injuries, describing each wound with clinical precision that somehow made them sound even more horrific. Standing Hawk gave his account of the confrontation with Jacob, emphasizing that Lila had publicly and voluntarily refused to return with her husband. Even White Dove offered a statement about how Lila had integrated into the camp, how she'd been treated with respect and kindness, how she'd shown no signs of being held against her will. Through it all, Kaya remained a steady presence, not hovering, but always nearby when Lila needed someone to steady her after a particularly difficult session of recounting trauma. He'd bring her water or food, or simply sit with her in companionable silence while she recovered her composure. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of testimony, Lila found herself unable to sleep. She slipped out of the healing lodge and walked toward the creek, needing the sound of moving water to quiet her racing thoughts. She wasn't surprised when Kaya appeared beside her, moving silently through the darkness. "Could not sleep?" he asked quietly. "Too many memories," Lila admitted. "Talking about it all, writing it down, it makes it real again in a way it wasn't before." They settled on the bank of the creek, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The moon was nearly full, painting everything in silver and shadow. "When my father died," Kaya said after a long silence, "I could not speak of it for many months. The memory was too large, too painful, but my grandmother told me that sometimes we must make pain smaller by giving it words. By speaking what happened, we take away some of its power over us." "Does it work?" "Eventually, not all at once. But yes, with time, the memories become stories, and stories are easier to carry than raw wounds." He paused. "What Jacob did to you, that will always be part of your history, but it does not have to be the only part. You can write new chapters, better chapters, starting now." Lila turned to look at him, at the strong lines of his profile in the moonlight. "What if I don't know how? What if I'm so broken that I can't—" "You are not broken," Kaya interrupted firmly. You are wounded, yes, but wounded is not the same as broken. Wounded things heal if given time and care. Broken things must be rebuilt from pieces. You are still whole, Lila. You just cannot see it yet because the wounds block your view. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted so badly to believe that she could be whole again, that she could be more than the sum of what Jacob had done to her. Teach me, she said suddenly. Teach me how to see myself the way you see me. Kaya's smile was gentle. I cannot teach you that. You must discover it yourself. But I can walk beside you while you look. I can point out the moments when your strength shows through. I can remind you on the dark days that dawn always comes eventually. Would that be enough? Yes, Lila whispered. That would be enough. They sat together in the moonlight, listening to the creek's endless song, and for the first time since crawling through those thorns, Lila allowed herself to imagine a future that didn't include fear. The answer came 3 weeks later in the form of dust on the horizon and the thunder of hooves approaching at speed. Lila was working with Morning Star, grinding corn into meal using a stone matat when the warning cry went up. Her hand stilled on the grinding stone, and her heart began to hammer against her ribs. Is it Jacob? She asked, though she already knew the answer from the way Morning Star's face had gone tight with worry. Kaya appeared at her side within seconds, as if he'd been waiting for exactly this moment. Not Jacob, he said grimly. Rodrigo, riding fast. Something has happened. They hurried toward the edge of camp where Standing Hawk and several warriors were already gathering. Rodrigo pulled his lathered horse to a stop, swung down from the saddle, and began speaking before his feet hit the ground. Jacob is coming, he said without preamble, his chest heaving. But not alone. He has convinced a Texas Ranger named Samuel Morrison to accompany him, along with 6 armed men. They claim Lila was kidnapped and that this camp is harboring a criminal. Morrison has a warrant. The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of tension through the gathered crowd. Lila felt the ground tilt beneath her feet, and only Kaya's hand on her arm kept her steady. A warrant for what? Standing Hawk demanded. For Lila's return to her lawful husband, Rodrigo said, pulling papers from his saddlebag. But I brought Marcus Blackwood with me. He is 2 hours behind with counterpapers, documents that challenge the warrant's validity and present evidence of Jacob's abuse. The problem is Jacob and Morrison will arrive first, probably within the hour. Then we prepare, Standing Hawk said, his voice cutting through the rising murmur of concern. He began issuing orders in rapid Comanche, and warriors scattered to their tasks. Rodrigo turned to Lila, his weathered face grave. Senora, you need to understand what is about to happen. Morrison is not like Jacob. He is a lawman who believes he is doing his duty. He will not be easily swayed by emotion or claims of abuse without proper documentation. Until Marcus arrives with the legal papers, we are operating in a gray area. What does that mean? Lila asked, though fear made her voice shake. It means you must be strong one more time, Kaya said quietly. It means you must stand before this ranger and this husband and tell your truth loud enough that it cannot be ignored. Can you do that? Could she? Lila looked around at the camp that had become her sanctuary, at Morning Star and Bluebird and Naya, who had shown her such kindness, at Standing Hawk, who had defended her without hesitation, at Kaya, who had saved her life and then spent weeks helping her remember she deserved to keep living. Could she stand there and let Jacob try to drag her back to hell? Could she find the courage to fight one more time? Yes, she said, and was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. I can do it. Naya appeared with a clean dress, this one decorated with more elaborate beadwork than Lila's everyday clothing. You will wear this, the old woman said firmly. You will look them in the eyes and show them a woman who has been honored by her new family, not a victim waiting to be rescued. You understand? Lila nodded and let Naya help her change behind the privacy of the healing lodge. When she emerged, Morning Star had braided her hair with blue beads and small white shells that caught the light. Bluebird pressed the knife Naya had given her into Lila's hand. Keep, Bluebird said in halting English. For courage. You strong. The simple words made Lila's eyes burn, but she blinked back tears and nodded. She tucked the knife into the belt at her waist, feeling its weight like a promise. She would not be helpless again. She would not go quietly. The wait felt eternal and instantaneous all at once. Lila stood with the women near the center of camp while warriors took positions around the perimeter, visible but not threatening, a show of strength rather than aggression. Standing Hawk stood at the front with Kaya on one side and Rodrigo on the other, and Lila took her place slightly behind them, flanked by Naya and Morningstar like bodyguards made of determination and fierce maternal protection. When the riders finally appeared, Lila's breath caught. Jacob rode at the front, his face set in lines of righteous anger. Beside him was a man who could only be Ranger Morrison, tall, lean, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years on the frontier. He wore the distinctive badge of the Texas Rangers and carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed completely in his own authority. Behind them came 6 men, all armed, all watching the camp with wary eyes. They stopped perhaps 30 feet from where Standing Hawk waited, and for a long moment nobody spoke. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring, broken only by the nervous snorting of horses and the distant cry of a hawk overhead. Finally, Morrison spoke. "I am Ranger Samuel Morrison of the Texas Rangers. I am here on official business regarding Lila Carter, who was reported kidnapped from her home 3 weeks ago. I have a warrant for her return to her lawful husband, Jacob Carter, and I am authorized to use force if necessary to execute this warrant." His voice was flat, professional, but Lila noticed he hadn't drawn his weapon. That had to mean something. Standing Hawk stepped forward, his posture radiating calm authority. "I am Standing Hawk, war chief of this band. The woman you speak of was not kidnapped. She was found dying in the wilderness, brought here for healing, and has chosen of her own free will to remain under our protection. We have committed no crime." "That's a lie!" Jacob's voice cracked across the space like a whip. "She's my wife. She belongs in my home. These savages have poisoned her mind against me." Morrison held up a hand, silencing Jacob without looking at him. "I'll need to speak with Mrs. Carter directly. Alone, if possible." "No," Kaya said flatly. "She will not be alone with him or with you. She will speak with witnesses present to protect her from coercion or violence." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "I don't take kindly to having my authority questioned. And we don't take kindly to lawmen who come to our treaty land making demands without bothering to hear all sides of a story," Standing Hawk replied. "You want to speak with the woman? Fine. Speak with her here, in front of all of us, so everyone can hear what is said, and there can be no lies about what happened." Morrison considered this, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough." He looked directly at Lila. "Mrs. Carter, I need you to come forward so I can see you clearly." Lila's legs felt like water, but she forced herself to walk forward until she stood beside Standing Hawk. She could feel Jacob's eyes on her like a physical weight, but she kept her gaze fixed on Morrison. The ranger studied her for a long moment, and she watched his expression shift as he took in the details. The Comanche dress, the beadwork in her hair, the way she stood with confidence rather than fear. His eyes lingered on her face, perhaps noting that she looked healthy and well-fed, not like someone who'd been held prisoner. "Mrs. Carter," Morrison said carefully, "your husband reports that you disappeared from your home 3 weeks ago. He claims you were taken by force. Is this true?" "No," Lila said, and her voice rang clear across the camp. "I was not taken by force. I was found in the wilderness where my husband and his brothers left me to die." Morrison's eyebrows rose. "That's a serious accusation, ma'am?" "It's the truth." Lila felt Kaya shift slightly closer, his presence lending her strength. "My husband and his brothers branded me like cattle, then threw me from a wagon into the thorns and rode away. They left me there to die because I couldn't give Jacob a son, because I was worthless in his eyes. If Kaya hadn't found me, I would have died exactly as Jacob intended." "You lying bitch!" Jacob tried to spur his horse forward, but Morrison's hand shot out, grabbing the bay's bridle. "Stay where you are, Carter," Morrison said sharply. Then, to Lila, "You're claiming your husband tried to kill you?" "I'm not claiming anything," Lila said. "I'm stating facts. Facts that are documented by the healer who treated my wounds, by the people who witnessed Jacob's attempt to take me back by force 2 weeks ago, by the traitor who has been gathering evidence of Jacob's crimes. Facts that will be presented to a judge by a lawyer who is on his way here right now with proper legal documentation. Morrison's eyes sharpened. What lawyer? Marcus Blackwood of San Antonio, Rodrigo interjected. He will arrive within 2 hours with evidence of Mr. Carter's pattern of violence, fraud, and abuse. Evidence that will challenge the validity of your warrant and demonstrate that Mrs. Carter has legitimate grounds for leaving her marriage. Grounds for leaving? Jacob's voice rose to a near shriek. She doesn't need grounds. She's my wife. The law says she belongs to me. The law says many things, Morrison replied, and Lila thought she detected a note of distaste in his voice. But even husbands don't have the right to brand their wives and leave them for dead. If what she's saying is true, it's not true. She's making it up to justify running away with her savage lover. Jacob gestured wildly at Kaya. Look at her dressed like one of them. She's clearly been corrupted by... I was dying in a torn wedding dress covered in blood when Kaya found me, Lila interrupted, her voice cutting through Jacob's rant like a blade. Everything I'm wearing was given to me by women who showed me more kindness in a day than you showed me in 3 months of marriage. And yes, I choose to stay here because these people treat me like a human being instead of property. Ranger Morrison, Jacob said, his voice dropping to something that might have been meant to sound reasonable. You can see she's not in her right mind. She needs to come home where she can be properly cared for. Properly cared for? Lila's laugh was bitter. Like you cared for me when you held me down so your brothers could burn me? Like you cared for me when you threw me out of that wagon and told me to crawl away and die? That's your idea of proper care? Morrison dismounted, moving with deliberate slowness. Mrs. Carter, these are serious allegations. If they're true, there would be evidence, scars, wounds, something physical. The moment hung suspended, and Lila knew this was her choice. She could refuse, could say the wounds were private, could maintain some dignity by keeping her shame hidden, or she could show them all exactly what Jacob had done and remove any doubt about who the monster was in this situation. She reached for the laces at the back of her dress. Lila, you don't have to... Kaya started, but she shook her head. Yes, I do, she said quietly. This is how we end it. With Naya's help, she loosened the dress enough to pull it down from her shoulders, exposing her back to the assembled crowd. She heard Morrison's sharp intake of breath, heard one of the men behind him curse softly, heard Jacob's silence, which was somehow worse than his shouting. The word is worthless, she said, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning through her veins. Jacob had his brothers hold me down while he pressed a branding iron against my skin and burned his judgment into my flesh. Then he threw me into the wilderness to die because I couldn't give him the son he wanted. Those are the facts, Ranger Morrison. Those are the scars that prove every word I've said is true. She pulled the dress back up and turned to face Morrison, and the expression on the ranger's face told her everything she needed to know. He believed her. Whatever he'd expected to find when he rode out here, it wasn't this, not a woman who bore the physical evidence of attempted murder on her skin. Morrison's jaw was tight as he turned to Jacob. Carter, I'm going to need you to... She did it to herself. Jacob's voice was desperate now, panic replacing anger. She was always unstable, always causing problems. She probably branded herself to make me look bad. Nobody brands themselves, Morrison said flatly. And even if that ridiculous claim were true, it wouldn't explain how she ended up in the wilderness half dead. Mr. Carter, I strongly suggest you stop talking and wait for your lawyer to arrive. I don't need a lawyer. I need my wife returned to me. That's what your warrant says. My warrant says I'm to investigate a kidnapping, Morrison corrected. And from where I'm standing, the only crime I can confirm happened here is the one done to this woman. He looked at Lila with something that might have been respect or sympathy or both. Mrs. Carter, do you wish to return to your husband? No, Lila said without hesitation. I will never return to him. I would rather die than go back to that house. Even if it means living here. Morrison gestured at the camp around them. Even if it means giving up civilization, your position in society, everything you knew? What position in society? Lila asked. What did I have except the prison of Jacob's house and the certainty that one day he'd find a reason to finish what he started? These people gave me sanctuary when no one else would. They healed me, taught me, protected me. They see me as a person worth saving. That's more than anyone in civilization ever offered me. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving from Lila to the gathered Comanche to Jacob's increasingly frantic face to the evidence written in scars across her back. Finally, he sighed. "I'm not going to execute this warrant," he said, "not without a proper investigation and legal representation for both parties. Mr. Carter, you'll need to take this matter before a judge. Mrs. Carter has made her position clear, and there's evidence suggesting she has legitimate grievances. Until a court decides otherwise, she's free to remain where she chooses." "You can't do that," Jacob shouted. "I have rights. She's my property." "She's a person," Morrison snapped, his patience clearly exhausted. "And I've seen enough to know there's a lot more to this story than you told me. Now you can ride back to San Antonio peacefully and wait for the legal process to unfold, or I can arrest you right now for filing a false report and wasting ranger time. Your choice." Jacob's face went through several shades of red and purple, and for a moment Lila thought he might actually try something stupid. But Morrison's hand rested on his pistol, and the warriors surrounding the camp hadn't lowered their weapons. After a long moment, Jacob jerked his horse's reins viciously. "This isn't over," he spat. "I'll take you to court. I'll drag your name through the mud. Everyone will know what kind of woman you are. Everyone will know what kind of man you are," Lila corrected, her voice ice cold. "They'll know you're the kind of man who brands women and throws them away. They'll know you're a coward who needed 6 men and a ranger to face 1 woman. And they'll know I chose anything, even living with people you call savages, over spending another day under your roof. So yes, Jacob, tell everyone, please. I want the whole world to know exactly what you did and what I survived." The venom in her voice seemed to surprise even her. This wasn't the quiet, beaten-down woman who had married Jacob 3 months ago. This was someone new, someone forged in pain and reborn in defiance, and Jacob could see it in her eyes. He wheeled his horse around without another word, and his men followed. They rode hard toward the horizon, dust rising in their wake like the ghost of everything Lila had left behind. Morrison watched them go, then turned back to Lila. "Ma'am, you should know that this will get messy. Carter's family has money and influence. They'll fight this in court, and it won't be pretty." "I know," Lila said, "but I'd rather fight in court than die in the wilderness. At least in court I have witnesses and a lawyer, and the truth on my side." Morrison nodded slowly. "I'll file a full report of what I saw here today, including your injuries. It might help when this goes before a judge." He glanced at Standing Hawk. "I appreciate you handling this peacefully. Could have gone a lot worse." "We are not the savages you have been taught to fear," Standing Hawk replied. "We are simply people protecting one of our own. Next time you receive a report about kidnapping from our camp, perhaps you will remember this day and ask more questions before riding out with armed men." Morrison had the grace to look somewhat embarrassed. "Fair point." He mounted his horse and tipped his hat to Lila. "Good luck, Mrs. Carter. You're going to need it." He rode away at a more measured pace than Jacob had, and Lila watched until he disappeared from view. Then, and only then, did she let her legs give out. Kaya caught her before she hit the ground, supporting her weight as the adrenaline that had been holding her together finally fled. "You did it," he murmured in her ear. "You stood up to him again, and you won." "Did I?" Lila asked, her voice shaking. "He's going to take me to court. He's going to make this into a spectacle. Everyone will know everything." "Good," Naya said, appearing at her other side. "Let them know. Let the whole world know what was done to you and how you survived it. Shame is a weapon, child, but it only works if you allow yourself to feel ashamed. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Nothing." Marcus Blackwood arrived 2 hours later as promised, accompanied by a clerk and carrying saddlebags stuffed with documents. He was younger than Lila expected, perhaps 35, with intelligent eyes and ink-stained fingers that spoke of a man who fought his battles with words and law rather than guns. He listened to everyone's account of what had happened with Morrison, took notes in precise handwriting, then turned to Lila with an expression that was both sympathetic and calculating. "Mrs. Carter, I'm going to be very direct with you," he said. "Jacob Carter is going to make this ugly. He's going to claim you abandoned your marriage for immoral purposes. He's going to suggest you were having an affair, that you're mentally unstable, that you were somehow complicit in your own abuse. He's going to drag your reputation through every courtroom and newspaper in Texas." "I know," Lila said quietly. But what choice do I have? Hide here forever? Live in fear that he'll find some legal way to force me back? No, Marcus said with a slight smile. We fight. We present evidence of systematic abuse. We bring in medical testimony. We demonstrate that you sought sanctuary after attempted murder, not that you abandoned your marriage on a whim. We paint a picture of a woman who survived incredible cruelty and found the strength to save herself. And we make Jacob Carter look like the monster he is. Can we win? Lila asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment, weighing his words carefully. Honestly, I don't know. The law heavily favors husbands, and Jacob's family has resources. But we have something powerful on our side. The truth, documented and witnessed. And we have you, alive and willing to testify when you should be dead. That counts for something. What do I need to do? First, we establish your legal right to remain here while the case proceeds. Standing Hawk's band is on treaty land, which gives us some protection. Second, we file countercharges against Jacob for assault, attempted murder, and fraud. Make him defend himself instead of just attacking you. Third, we build the strongest case possible for annulment based on extreme cruelty. Annulment, hope flickered in Lila's chest. Not just separation? If we can prove the marriage was obtained through deception, which Mary Henderson's testimony about Jacob's prior engagement helps establish, and that it involved violence that endangered your life, we have grounds for annulment. It won't be easy, but it's possible. Lila looked at Kaya, at Standing Hawk, at all the people who had sheltered her and believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. How long will this take? Months, probably, Marcus admitted. Maybe longer. Courts move slowly, and Jacob will drag it out as long as he can. But the good news is that Morrison's report will work in our favor. A Texas Ranger witnessed your injuries and declined to force you to return. That's powerful testimony. Then we do it, Lila said with more confidence than she felt. We fight him in court, and we win. Marcus smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. That's the spirit. Now, let's get to work. I need detailed statements from everyone, medical documentation from your healer, witness accounts of everything Jacob did and said. By the time we're done, we're going to have a case so airtight, even the most biased judge will have to acknowledge it. The work consumed the next several days. Marcus was thorough to the point of obsession, questioning Lila about every detail of her marriage, having Naya document every injury with descriptions so clinical they made the abuse sound even more horrific. He interviewed Standing Hawk, Kaya, Rodrigo, even Morningstar and Bluebird through translators, building a comprehensive picture of Lila's rescue and recovery. Through it all, Lila felt herself transforming. Each time she told the story, it hurt a little less. Each time she described what Jacob had done, she felt a little more of his power over her crumble. By the time Marcus finished gathering evidence, Lila could talk about the branding without crying, could describe being thrown from the wagon without her voice shaking. On the final evening before Marcus and Rodrigo were due to return to San Antonio, a feast was prepared in their honor. The camp gathered around the fire, and Standing Hawk stood to speak. Today we have done something important, he said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. We have shown that people of different tribes can work together for justice. The white man's law is often used against us, but tonight we have learned how to make it work for us, how to use their own rules to protect one of our own. He looked at Lila. Sunrise after storm, for that is what we have named you in our language. You came to us broken and dying. But you did not stay broken. You healed. You learned. You fought. Tonight you stand as an example to all women that no man, no matter how powerful, has the right to destroy what he cannot control. Your battle is not over, but you have already won the most important victory, the victory over fear itself. The camp erupted in approval, voices calling out in Comanche and hands drumming on thighs in rhythmic celebration. Lila felt tears streaming down her face, but these were different tears. Not sorrow or pain, but something that might have been joy mixed with gratitude, mixed with the overwhelming realization that she had found family in the most unexpected place. After the feast, when the fire had burned down to coals and people were drifting toward their lodges, Kaya found Lila sitting alone by the creek. He settled beside her without asking permission, and they sat in comfortable silence for a long moment. Sunrise after storm, Lila said finally. That's what Standing Hawk called me. It is your Comanche name, Kaya confirmed. Every person has two names, the one they are born with and the one they earn through living. You earned yours. What's yours? Lila asked. Kaya smiled. Kaya means older brother, which is not very exciting, but my earned name is Sheikani Taimu, he who saves broken wings. My people gave it to me after I saved that hawk I told you about. They say it defines who I am, that I cannot resist helping things that are wounded. Is that what I am to you? Lila asked quietly. Another broken wing to fix? Kaya turned to look at her fully, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. At first, maybe. When I found you in the thorns, I saw something that needed saving, and I could not leave you to die. But Lila, you are not broken wings anymore. You are a hawk learning to fly again, and I do not want to save you now. I want to fly beside you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning that went beyond simple friendship or gratitude. Lila knew what he was saying, what he was offering, and the knowledge terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Kaya, I'm still married in the eyes of the law, she said carefully. Even if I don't want to be, even if that marriage was a nightmare, it still exists on paper. And I'm so damaged, so broken by what Jacob did. You are not broken, Kaya interrupted firmly. And I do not care about white man's paper that says you belong to a monster. In my culture, in my heart, you belong only to yourself. When you are ready, if you are ever ready, to think about belonging to someone else by choice, I will be here. But I do not ask for that now. I only ask that you know I see you, Lila, not as a project or a wounded thing or an obligation. I see you as a woman of strength and courage and beauty who survived what should have killed her, and I would be honored simply to stand beside you as you discover who you are meant to become. Lila found she couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Instead, she reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his, and they sat together watching the moonlight dance on the water. The future was uncertain. Jacob would fight her in court, society would judge her, and the path ahead was fraught with obstacles. But in this moment, sitting beside a man who saw her as precious rather than worthless, surrounded by people who had chosen her as family, Lila felt something she hadn't felt in so long she'd forgotten what it was like. She felt hope. She felt possibility. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she was worth fighting for after all. And somewhere in the darkness, a hawk cried out, calling to its mate, calling to the sky, calling to the endless prairie that promised freedom to those brave enough to spread their wings and fly. The summons arrived 6 weeks later with Rodrigo, who rode into camp looking grim. Lila was working with Bluebird, practicing her Comanche while sewing a new pair of moccasins, when she saw the trader dismount and head straight for Standing Hawk's lodge. Her hands stilled on the beadwork, and she knew without being told that the moment she'd been dreading had finally come. Kaya found her before anyone else could, his face unreadable as he approached. Marcus needs to speak with you. The court date has been set. Lila's stomach clenched, but she forced herself to stand, to smooth down her dress, to walk toward Standing Hawk's lodge with her head high, even though every instinct screamed at her to run. Inside, she found Marcus sitting cross-legged on buffalo robes, documents spread around him like fallen leaves. His face was serious but not defeated, which she took as a cautiously good sign. "Mrs. Carter," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "The judge has scheduled a hearing for 3 weeks from today. Jacob is bringing charges of abandonment and demanding your return. We'll be presenting our counter case for annulment based on extreme cruelty and fraud. It's going to be a full trial, not just a simple hearing." 3 weeks, Lila repeated, the words feeling surreal. "That's not much time." "No, but it's enough. We have our evidence prepared, our witnesses lined up. Naya has agreed to testify through a translator, which is unusual, but the judge has allowed it. Rodrigo will speak to your character and the circumstances of your rescue. Ranger Morrison's report is officially part of the record." Marcus paused, studying her face. "But Lila, you need to understand what you're walking into. Jacob's lawyers have been spreading rumors throughout San Antonio. They're painting you as an unfaithful wife who ran away with a Comanche lover. They're suggesting you were mentally unstable, that you fabricated the abuse to justify adultery. The court of public opinion has already tried you and found you guilty. The word should have devastated her, but Lila found she felt only a cold, resigned anger. Of course they have. It's easier to believe a woman is crazy or immoral than to accept that a respected businessman is a monster. Exactly, Marcus said. Which is why we're not going to play defense. We're going to attack. We have Mary Henderson ready to testify about Jacob's deception. We have 3 ranchers who will swear to his cattle rustling. We have medical evidence of your injuries that no reasonable person can dismiss. And we have you, alive and articulate and clearly in your right mind. By the time we're done, Jacob Carter's reputation will be in ruins. And mine? Lila asked quietly. Marcus met her eyes without flinching. Your reputation is already destroyed, Lila. That's the unfortunate truth. No matter how this trial ends, San Antonio society will never fully accept you again. A woman who leaves her husband, even for legitimate reasons, becomes unmarriageable, unemployable, essentially invisible. You need to decide if you can live with that. Lila thought about the life she'd left behind, the suffocating parlors, the judgmental glances, the constant pressure to be smaller and quieter and more obedient. She thought about Jacob's house with its expensive furniture and its atmosphere of barely contained violence. She thought about the woman she'd been, desperate to please, terrified of making mistakes, convinced her worth was measured by her ability to produce a son. Then she thought about the woman she was becoming, strong enough to grind corn and tan hides, brave enough to face down armed men, confident enough to laugh with friends who saw her as an equal. She thought about morning lessons with Bluebird, about Naya's patient healing, about Morningstar's fierce sisterhood. She thought about Kaya's steady presence and the way he looked at her like she was someone worth knowing, not just someone worth possessing. I can live with it, she said firmly. I'd rather be invisible to San Antonio society than dead in the wilderness where Jacob left me. At least invisible means I get to choose my own life. Marcus smiled, and it was genuine this time, reaching his eyes. Good. Then we fight with everything we have. But Lila, there's one more thing you need to know. Jacob's lawyers are going to ask you explicit questions about your relationship with Kaya. They're going to try to prove adultery, which would destroy our case. You need to be prepared to answer under oath whether anything inappropriate has happened between you. Lila felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she held Marcus's gaze. Nothing inappropriate has happened. Kaya saved my life and has been nothing but respectful. We're friends. That's all the court needs to know. Is it all? Marcus asked gently. Because if there's anything more, even just feelings or intentions, Jacob's lawyers will try to expose it. They'll twist anything they can find into evidence of infidelity. Before Lila could respond, Kaya spoke from the lodge entrance where he'd been standing silently. There is nothing to expose. I have not touched Lila Carter in any way that would dishonor her or give her husband grounds for complaint. I have been her protector and her friend, nothing more. His voice was steady, but Lila heard the careful control in it, the things he wasn't saying beneath the words he chose. Marcus looked between them, nodded slowly, then began gathering his papers. Then that's the story we tell. Protector and friend, nothing more. The truth, cleanly presented, with no room for speculation. He stood, brushing dust from his pants. I'll return to San Antonio and make final preparations. Rodrigo will come for you 5 days before the trial, so we have time to prepare your testimony. In the meantime, rest. Eat. Keep building your strength. You're going to need every ounce of it. After Marcus left, Lila walked to the creek, her thinking place, the spot where clarity always seemed to find her. She wasn't surprised when Kaya followed, settling on the bank beside her with that same comfortable silence they'd developed over the weeks. Were you telling the truth in there? Lila asked after a long moment. Are we just friends? Kaya was quiet, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of honesty that sometimes hurts more than lies. We are what circumstances allow us to be. While you are married in the eyes of white law, while Jacob still has any claim on you, I will not cross lines that would give him weapons to use against you. I will not let my feelings, whatever they may be, become the reason you lose your freedom. But you have feelings, Lila said, and it wasn't quite a question. Yes, Kaya admitted. I have feelings. I have had them since the day I found you in the thorns, though it took me time to understand what they were. But feelings do not require action, Lila.
I can care for you without demanding anything in return. I can want your happiness without insisting I be the source of it. That is what it means to truly care for someone, to put their well-being above your own desires. Lila turned to look at him, at the strong lines of his profile in the afternoon light, at the way the sun caught in his long, dark hair. And after the trial, if we win, if the marriage is annulled, then what? Then you decide, Kaya said simply. You decide who you want to be, where you want to live, what kind of life you want to build. Maybe that life includes me. Maybe it doesn't.
Either way, I will respect your choice, because that is what you deserve, the right to choose your own path without pressure or obligation. The words should have been reassuring, but instead they made Lila's chest ache with something she couldn't quite name. She reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers as they curled around hers. I'm scared, she admitted, not of the trial, not of Jacob, but of what comes after. I don't know who I am without someone telling me who to be. Jacob told me I was worthless. My father told me I was a burden. Even the church told me my purpose was to be obedient and produce children. Without all those voices telling me my value, I don't know how to measure my own worth. Kaya shifted closer, his shoulder pressing against hers in a gesture of solidarity rather than romance. Then maybe that is what the time after the trial is for, learning to measure your own worth by your own standards. Learning to be Lila Carter, or Sunrise After Storm, or whoever you discover yourself to be when no one is defining you but yourself. They sat together as the sun moved across the sky, neither speaking, just existing in each other's presence. And somehow, that silence said more than words could have, that whatever happened in that courtroom, whatever the future held, they had this moment of peace before the storm. The 3 weeks passed in a strange blur of normalcy and anticipation. Lila continued her daily routines, grinding corn, learning language, working leather, but everything felt tinged with the awareness of the approaching trial. At night she dreamed of courtrooms that morphed into cages, of Jacob's face looming over her, of running through endless prairies while voices screamed accusations at her back. But the mornings always came with their routine comfort. Naya would check her healing back and declare her progress satisfactory. Morning Star would share breakfast and teach her new words. Bluebird would sit beside her while they worked, chattering away in Comanche that Lila was starting to understand more than she expected. And Kaya would appear at some point during the day, often bringing small gifts, a particularly beautiful feather, wild berries from his scouting, once a necklace made of turquoise beads that he claimed his mother would have wanted Lila to have. 5 days before the trial, Rodrigo returned with a wagon and an unexpected companion, a middle-aged Mexican woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "This is my wife, Rosa," Rodrigo said as he helped the woman down from the wagon. "She will come with us to San Antonio. She will stay with you during the trial, help you dress appropriately for court, make sure you are not alone in that place." Rosa took one look at Lila and immediately pulled her into a fierce embrace. "Mi hija," she murmured, and though Lila didn't speak Spanish, she understood the tenderness in the word. "What they did to you, it is unforgivable, but you will show them you are stronger than their cruelty. You will walk into that court like a queen, and they will see they could not break you." The journey to San Antonio took 2 days, and with every mile that passed, Lila felt civilization pressing back in on her like a vice. The freedom of the prairie gave way to fenced ranches, then scattered homesteads, then the outskirts of the city itself, with its wooden buildings and dusty streets, and the overwhelming press of people who stared at their wagon with undisguised curiosity. Marcus had arranged rooms for them at a small hotel on the edge of town, far enough from the main streets that Lila wouldn't have to face constant scrutiny. Rosa immediately took charge, helping Lila bathe and dress in the proper clothing Marcus had provided, a simple but respectable dress in dark blue, her hair pinned up in a style that suggested sobriety and respectability rather than frivolity. When Lila looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. The deerskin dresses and beaded moccasins had made her feel like someone new, someone strong. This dress made her feel like she was putting on a costume, playing the role of the proper white woman for an audience that had already decided she was guilty. "I look like a fraud," she said quietly. "You look like a survivor," Rosa corrected. "You look like a woman who has been through hell and came out the other side." That dress is just armor, Hiha. What matters is what you carry underneath it. Marcus arrived that evening to go over final preparations, and Kaya came with him. Seeing Kaya in the hotel room, so obviously out of place in the narrow space with its floral wallpaper and fussy furniture, made Lila's chest constrict with something between amusement and sorrow. He belonged in open spaces, under wide skies, not trapped in white civilization's boxes. Tomorrow we have a final meeting with all our witnesses, Marcus said, spreading papers across the small table. The trial begins the day after, Judge Harold Whitmore presiding. He's fair but traditional, which means he'll be uncomfortable with much of what we present. Our goal is to overwhelm him with evidence so substantial he can't dismiss it, even if he wants to. What about Jacob? Lila asked. Will he be there tomorrow? No, the meeting is just for our side. You'll see Jacob in court, but not before. His lawyers have requested he not be in the same room with you until the trial begins, probably to avoid any confrontation that might make him look bad. Coward, Lila muttered, and Marcus smiled grimly. Yes, but a coward with expensive lawyers and a family fortune. Don't underestimate him, Lila. Desperate men do desperate things. That night, Lila couldn't sleep. She stood at the small window of her hotel room, looking out at San Antonio's nighttime streets, and felt like she was standing on the edge of a precipice. Tomorrow would set everything in motion: the testimony, the evidence, the public examination of her most painful memories. There would be no going back once it started. A soft knock came at her door, and when she opened it, Kaya stood in the hallway looking as uncomfortable as she'd ever seen him. I should not be here, he said quietly. Rosa would scold me for the impropriety, but I could not sleep without knowing you were all right. Lila stepped back to let him in. Propriety be damned. If they were already being accused of adultery, what was one more supposed transgression? Kaya entered but stayed near the door, maintaining that careful distance he always kept. I'm terrified, Lila admitted. Not of losing, though that terrifies me too, but of having to stand in front of all those people and tell them what Jacob did. Of having them look at me and judge whether I'm telling the truth or just a hysterical woman making accusations. They will judge, Kaya said. People always judge what they do not understand. But Lila, you have already proven your truth. You have the scars. You have the witnesses. You have the evidence of survival written into your very body. They can judge all they want, but they cannot deny what exists. What if the judge doesn't believe me? What if he decides a woman's word isn't enough even with all the evidence? Then we will figure out another path, Kaya said firmly. You will not go back to Jacob. I will not allow it. If the white man's law fails you, then we will find another way to keep you safe. I promise you this, Lila. You will never be property again, not while I have breath in my body. The intensity in his voice made Lila's eyes sting with unshed tears. She crossed the room before she could think better of it and wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face against his chest. For a moment he stood frozen, then his arms came around her, careful, protective, holding her like she was something precious that might break if gripped too tightly. I don't know how to do this without you, she whispered against his shirt. You can do anything, Kaya said into her hair. You already have. Tomorrow you walk into that court and you tell your story, and I will be there in the back of the room, and when you need strength, you look at me and remember, you crawled through thorns when you could have died. You faced 7 armed men when you could have hidden. You are the storm that comes after sunrise, and storms do not bow to anyone. They stood like that for a long moment, drawing comfort from each other's presence, until finally Kaya gently disentangled himself. I should go before someone sees and adds more fuel to Jacob's accusations. But I will be there tomorrow, and the day after, and every day you need me. You are not alone in this, Lila. You have never been less alone. After he left, Lila returned to the window and looked out at the sleeping city. Somewhere in these streets, Jacob was preparing his own version of events, polishing his lies, getting ready to paint himself as the wronged husband and her as the faithless wife. But he didn't know what she'd become in the weeks since he'd thrown her away. He was expecting the broken, frightened woman who had cowered in his house. He would meet sunrise after storm instead, and she would show him exactly how much strength could grow in the scorched earth where he'd tried to bury her. The morning of the trial dawned clear and cold. the kind of day where the sky stretches endless and blue above the dusty streets of San Antonio. Rosa helped Lila dress with gentle efficiency, pinning her hair and adjusting her collar until she looked every inch the respectable woman. The scar on her back was hidden beneath proper clothing, but Lila could feel it there, a reminder of where she'd been and why she was fighting. The courthouse was an imposing stone building in the center of town, its columns and arched windows designed to convey the weight and authority of the law. A crowd had already gathered outside, curious townspeople, newspaper reporters, people who had heard the rumors and come to see the spectacle of a woman accusing her husband of attempted murder. Lila walked through them with her head high, Rosa on one side and Marcus on the other, ignoring the whispers that followed in her wake. Inside, the courtroom was exactly as she'd imagined. Wooden benches for spectators, a raised platform for the judge, tables for the lawyers, and a witness stand that looked uncomfortably exposed. Jacob was already there, sitting at the defense table with two well-dressed lawyers flanking him. He'd lost weight since she'd last seen him, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he wasn't sleeping well. Good. Let him suffer even a fraction of what he'd put her through. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and Lila saw him flinch. What did he see when he looked at her? The broken woman he'd branded? Or someone new, someone who'd survived his worst and come back stronger? She held his gaze until he looked away, and that small victory steadied her nerves. Judge Whitmore entered, a severe-looking man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years making difficult decisions.